So a few housekeeping things just to mention to folks as we get started. First of all, again, welcome. Thanks for being here. This is important work. Showing up and being ready to learn and listen is so important for you and your community of faith that you're representing. I'm Kathy Douglas, and I'm called the Faith Formation Minister in the three regions of Southwestern Ontario, Horseshoe Falls, Antler River Watershed, and Western Ontario Waterways. Part of my work is to be sure that you folks can offer safe work for yourself and safe work for those that you're in ministry with, whatever that may be, whatever age or stage or situation. This today is a very quick overview. We're calling it 101 Duty of Care. That there would be more information to share on another occasion, or if you want to reach out for more details on anything you've heard today that you want some discussion about. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement and then a very quick prayer and then share our agenda with you. So as we do a land acknowledgement, I encourage you to, however, do that in a way that works for you. If you'd like to share something in the chat, that's fine. Speak it yourself in your own place. I'd ask you to turn off your mics if you could do that so you're muted. I'm going to say that as yesterday was Earth Day, I am very cognizant of the connections and the term all my relations, that as we are connected to the earth, to the creatures, to each other, to the cosmos in ways that are mysterious and a great gift. And I know that the Indigenous people hold that connection dearly in their lives. So as we recognize the treaties and the lands that we're all on, may we continue to work for right relations within human connections and church connections and spiritual connections, but also with all of the creatures of this earth. And I invite you into a moment of prayer with me. Holy One, be with us as we gather. Let your voice, your words, your feeling come through to us as we hear about caring for ourselves and those who we are in relationship with, particularly in our communities of faith and our outreach projects. We strive to make it safe and brave and inclusive for all. Be with us as we gather. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. There's going to be a lot of talk today, not so much talk from you, but talk from Terri and I. And in a moment, I'm going to let Terri introduce herself. So this is really an overview. There will be slides, and I'm sure we can share those with you as well. But please feel free to send messages in the chat directly to me if it needs to be private. If there's something you're having trouble with, and if you can't do it in the chat, you can unmic and ask for some help if that's needed. And even after this event, I would dearly love to know if there's anything that didn't work for you or that you had some challenges with. That's part of doing care for each other. Now I'm going to go to my share screen. I think. And now I'm trying to get to the thing needs to disappear. Okay. Terri, I wonder if, well, I'll first share the agenda, and then when you come on, you can introduce yourself. So this is our agenda. We hope it's what you came for, and if it's not, take care of yourself and say, I'm off. This isn't what I wanted today, and there'll be no offense taken. So we're going to be running through some theological and historical rationales about duty of care and why we need to take care. We'll look at some of the risks of no action. And as you can see, the exposures to liabilities and insurance requirements. what is involved in taking action and developing a simple risk management program, looking at assessing your church's context, some of the tools that we might share with you about doing that work, the processes in doing duty of care. And then if there's time and depending how things go, we'll have some discussion and taking some questions. And we will look at some real life examples for you to contemplate about. So making sure where our congregations and our communities go from here. I do think at this point, Terri, I'd love you to introduce yourself. You're one of the most important people on this call for me. So please say hello and introduce yourself before we get into this.
So my name is Terri Sparling, and I'm a retired professional social worker. My entire career was in social work, and a good chunk of that time was in an administrative role, providing leadership to a small children's mental health center in Huron and Perth counties in Ontario. I come to you as a volunteer. So I am retired, and one of the things I put my hand up for was being a youth group leader. But the other, I put my hand up for a number of things, but I took on the duty of care part because I felt I had some professional knowledge around the risk situations in which caring people find themselves, and recognizing that a church needs some program, but it needs to be manageable given that most churches are not staffed by paid personnel. And so just recognizing that we have the same responsibility to provide care of anyone and our resources, but how we do it, it needs to be sensitive to what resources we have available to us.
Thank you. So glad you're here, Terri. So a little bit of background on this is not my wording. This comes from the United Church of Canada at this point, that there's a theological statement of commitment. The United Church of Canada is committed to providing a safe environment for worship, work, and study in all pastoral charges, congregations, institutions, agencies, and organizations, or other bodies which operate under its name. And some grounding in our scriptures, Matthew 25, as followers of Jesus, we are called to demonstrate love and honor to ourselves and others. It is a sacred trust to make even the most vulnerable safe. Oh, shoot, went too far.
One more.
There.
I think this is me.
So, sorry, am I right? Yeah, Terry's got the okay to interrupt me anytime. So why are we doing this? Pastoral charges are highly recommended to develop and implement a written policy and a procedures around duty of care. And that I wish to say this didn't happen, but we have past violations and occurring present violations of trust that have not always been responded to justly, nor have we been proactive. So the time for this work is now.
And in fact, it really been long overdue. So maybe I'll take it from here. The expression duty of care really is a legal principle that talks about the responsibility that leaders have in ensuring that their bodies, whether those are organizations or institutions or programs, have put in place measures that would help keep all participants and those involved safe. I'm just going back to thinking about the history. Um, there's always been a bit of a presumption, and maybe only within our own faith communities, but there's a presumption that people who go to church are good people. We don't need to do this because we're good people. We wouldn't want to do that. We're kind. Faith equals trust. And yet we know that within our bodies, there have been examples where that trust has been broken, and there has been denial about that as well. And so this is our opportunity to make it right and to take steps to keep wherever we practice as safe as possible. you know, it's interesting, the phrase right relations comes from the work of Truth and Reconciliation, but I think of this work to be duty of care, to be about always cultivating right relations among us. Maybe next slide. So before I launch into covering kind of some nuts and bolts of what you might consider in a risk management program, that sounds so intimidating, an approach to minimizing risks within your work, I want to be honest and transparent that I'm no expert in this. I certainly have spent more time reflecting on it than perhaps some people have. I had to have policies and procedures in place in my place of employment. Um, but I would say that even the work that I've done is work in progress. So I want you to recognize that what I'm sharing in terms of work with my own faith community, Avon United, to Avondale United in Stratford, that we're not perfect. We haven't landed the perfect mousetrap. We've got there's pieces of work that I intended to do that still are not finished. So I think it's important that you recognize that we all have limits, and what we're trying to build needs to be doable. But what took me to this was back when it was the former Church of Central United in Stratford. We began looking at Faithful Footsteps back in 2012 when it first came out, and that served us well. Primarily building a handbook, that was probably our biggest contribution. And then when Central amalgamated with St. John's, and then now there's been several other amalgamations comprising Avondale United, we refreshed it. But what prompted us to refresh it was insurance. Insurance wanted to renew in 2021, and they wanted to know what was our policy on X. And we hadn't refreshed that since the amalgamation in 2016. And so sometimes we do things, the right thing, for not our own reasons. I won't say for the wrong reasons, but it was certainly prompted by, we wouldn't have gotten insurance had we not actually developed something. And that might not have happened to you yet, but I think that insurance companies certainly are looking to bolster those organizations that they provide coverage for, to minimize their risk. So that too could happen for you. Um, and that's when we began paying attention to it, was actually 2021. So this is still relatively new work for us. The Faithful Footsteps document, or the duty of care document that the United Church has drawn together and refreshed a couple of times, I would say offers a gold standard. And I would urge you to start small and recognize you could do lots, but it's important to fit it to your context and the resources that you've got to devote to this. The risks in taking no actions is that you have not defined reasonable measures to protect people, and then something happens. No one intends for things to go wrong. But risk management really means that you've taken some steps to limit what can go wrong. It can go wrong in a number of ways. It can be in a deliberate act, it can be carelessness, and it can be a mistake or an accident. Next slide. I think this might be you.
I'm so sorry, Terry. I can't see my notes, so just tell
That's
me when
okay.
to come in. So the risks of and who we're thinking about in these situation are certainly the participants, those who we would often name in different situations as vulnerable persons, and that has a lot to do with power like power differentials. So children, elderly, any person seeking need of assistance for a variety of reasons would be considered a participant. And sometimes those we overlap all of these things. Sometimes you're the participant, sometimes you're a volunteer. So the next is also to do some protection for volunteers. I'm guessing that's the many of you folks here today that you need to, this work is as much to support and protect those coming to the programs as it is for you that are offering your gifts and your service and your ministry to others. So Sunday school, youth leaders, pastoral care visitors. I mean, it could go beyond that too, and we'll get into some examples. Making lunch for people. Those are all situations where you're doing some volunteer work. Church as an organization, you can read that there. In the event that anything happens and the insurance and legal become involved, then the church becomes liable. So these are the things these are where we need to be thinking about.
Keep going.
Yeah, thanks. Completely lost my track.
Okay, maybe I'll jump in then.
Sure.
So I invite you to think about your own faith community's context. And again, as you think about what you have done or what you maybe feel the need to do now, I would say if you have never thought about duty of care, you have never developed a policy, you don't have any processes, I would start with education. um, the church has been going for a long time, and we've relied on paid staff, lay staff, volunteers to offer programs, and to suddenly waltz in with a policy that's supposed to think about participants, all of our various settings, activities, what supervision or lack of supervision is provided, what are the relationships we have to one another, what can go wrong. It won't make sense to people about instituting anything if people don't first understand why you're doing it. And so starting with education is a great way of getting your community to think about the work they do. I happen to be privileged to be in a faith community that's larger than some. There are several paid staff. There are part-time staff, and then there's a range of volunteers that run just all sorts of programs. And so what we need and what we're able to do is maybe different than what a single point charge or a 5 point charge or a church that's got 12 members coming out on Sunday. Your needs are going to be different. But if you always are thinking about who comes, where are they participating in church related activities, what are those activities? If it's Bible study in a group in a church building, kind of different from hiking in a forest with no supervision. So just kind of thinking about the things that you do, and also who is providing supervision for those activities. Um, Maybe go one more. Another screen. Yeah. So the words risk management always sound so intimidating, but it's really about thinking about what are some reasonable measures we can take that will help protect people. So it starts with looking at your context. Where are your leadership roles? At minimum, your risk management could be that all of your paid staff have a screening process before they're hired. That screening process may include references, it may include police checks and vulnerable person screens, which are done through your local police. But assessing your context to know where are your leadership roles and where could there be potential harm. So one tool, and I'm not saying this is a prescriptive formula for building your own program, but thinking about having a job description helps put the role in some context, and it helps define responsibilities and where that role is accountable to. That can help. I mean, certainly it's help for paid positions. It's important to define the scope of the work and who you're accountable to. But it can be very helpful for volunteers to feel like they have someone they can go to. So having a simple job description is helpful. And again, if you are small, you might start with just even your staff and then think about broadening it to your volunteer roles. In our case, We have a lot of volunteers that work in a lot of different settings, but what we did is we started small. We thought about where are our biggest risks, and our biggest risks are with vulnerable people, and that happens to be children and youth and seniors who may have some various range of impairments that would make them more vulnerable and more reliant on someone who might be coming to visit them. Uh, we also thought about other things besides abuse. Oftentimes, when people are thinking about duty of care, they're imagining that it's just about abuse, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, but it can also include abuse of trust. So, counters, people who manage money. So, we've embraced some thinking about those volunteers that are generating resources for the church. Um, we've also thought about people who might be holding confidential information and just making sure that they understand about the importance of caring for confidential information, whether that is about someone's personal troubles, or whether that's about their financial situation, because sometimes stewardship and finance people find themselves privy to confidential information. So, thinking about what's your context and those roles, one tool that can be helpful is a job description. Again, not prescriptive. Maybe go on
I'm
to the next.
I'm going to just mention something with this, just a concrete piece of information. After this presentation, we can send you some documents. I have a template for a job description. It's one pager that you can quickly go through and use for your own purposes. I find some concrete documents are helpful as well. So that will be something that we can offer you.
Yes, and there will be a list of the resources that we've drawn from so that you can go back to the source. But Avondale would also make available their handbook, which again is a work in progress. So you would be welcome to use, retrofit, and borrow any forms that we have developed that can be helpful. This one's a tough one because I think oftentimes um, shifting from an environment where if people said they would help out, and now suddenly we're thinking about a selection process, I just want to acknowledge that you may be in a situation where those positions have already been working and now you're trying to institute some sort of process. That's where education helps people understand why you're implementing something. But you will find that you'll need to think about, are you going to have a selection process? Sometimes that seems like a luxury when you are scraping together, is there someone who can run that group, instead of, I've got 10 applicants and I want to choose the best one. So I want to just acknowledge that this thinking is imported from other kinds of organizations, but churches have to look at what's their reality. Not all volunteers need to go through a screening process, but you will find that as you've thought about those leadership roles, that there may be increased risk. You'll want to have some demonstrated that you took time to think about, is this a good fit for this volunteer? So, whenever you're getting information about someone to decide that you've got proof that they can do that job or that they've been chosen for that job, you need paper, a paper trail, and so people need to understand that there's a form that collects that information, name, address, that you've agreed to do this, that you understand their information is confidential, and then um, we only developed paper for those roles for which there would be screening. We didn't create paper for all volunteers that do anything in the church. We would spend more time trying to update forms and always being behind if we had done that for all. So it was really only those roles that we felt there needed to be some screening. When we think about screening, I think that's always intimidating. I think it can be intimidating for the person who's agreeing to be screened, but it can be intimidating for the person who's doing the screening. So just, thinking carefully about what kinds of screening tool do you want to use? Is it an interview? Is it a conversation with somebody who said, I'd like to lead Sunday school. I'd like to be the youth group leader. That's okay. If that's your process, that they may meet with the minister, then that's fine. You might decide that you want to attach personal references. Again, that's a great way of saying that you've taken some time to think about this person who might be new to you, but known to others, that they would be a good fit for this position. Um, People oftentimes presume that the safest thing to do is a police record check and a vulnerable person screen. And those are formalized screening tools that you might choose to do. But I do want to recognize that they have their limits. They are only a moment in time. They will not reflect any new things that happen after the screen occurred. Um, Doing it once and never doing it again, you need to recognize you'll never know what happened afterwards. There's also limits in terms of between provinces. So if someone has come from another area, they may not have a record in Ontario, but they had a record in BC. There may not be a carryover in terms of those things. That's where maybe a combination of references and a check might be useful. But again, don't presume that you have to use all of those tools as you're trying to implement a process. A simple process would be an interview or a conversation, and considering personal references. The other thing is that the last thing you want to do is create a barrier to people participating. So if you're going to use those formal checks like police check, vulnerable person screen, it's a good idea that the church cover the cost of that. It's generally $25 at least in our area it is. And I don't think you want to make a prospective volunteer absorb that cost. It's also one of the reasons why we chose not to have every volunteer produce a criminal record check, because we probably have 100 people that volunteer for things. So really important to be thoughtful about why you would choose to do that. There's a practice that we developed in my work environment that we've imported over, and I haven't completed it, but I am sharing it. But there is a way that you can do an annual process that just says nothing's changed since my last check. I've reread the handbook, and nothing has changed since my last criminal reference check. And the person signs off on that. And that's a reasonable step to take that stops you from having to necessarily do a check every year. I think that's all I want to say about that one. Oh, sorry. There, I will also say, um, just because someone has committed an offense or has been found guilty of something, it does not necessarily mean they can't volunteer. So there still is the opportunity that you, as the minister, if you're doing the screening, or you, as the volunteer who has agreed to screen, or maybe you develop a committee that is part of any decisions about volunteers, um, you may still choose to have that person serve, because whatever they did wrong was so long ago, and their personal references validated that there's been no further concerns. It may have been a period of time in their life that they were struggling, and they're past that. It may be that whatever they did has nothing to do with the current volunteer role that they're taking on. So it isn't a black and white. If you have a criminal history, that you can never ever be a volunteer. And I'll give you an example from my work environment. I worked in a children's mental health center. We worked with kids that sometimes found themselves in conflict with the law. And there was an individual in the community that I had known for a long time who had done some excellent volunteering. But part of the reason he was so respected was he had come from the other side. He had found himself in conflict with the law, had served time, uh, and and we still chose him to serve in a staffing capacity. we couldn't do that now because he didn't have the academic qualifications. But 25 years ago, it was okay to do that. And he was one of my best employees. He made a difference with some kids that wouldn't believe um, staff who had been trained professionally. He came from street experience and he could reach people that people like me couldn't reach. And I never regretted that decision. But if I had made the decision based upon his criminal reference check, I wouldn't have hired him. So I just offer that as an example. The next screen's good. Um, the other thing you need to think about in your approach is what are your processes. So you can't develop something if you don't have somebody who's going to oversee it, and having tools that help you be consistent over time allows you to manage something if the person who said they would do that has retired or died or moved on. Having those things defined and standardized a bit can help you manage changes in personnel, especially if the person that's overseeing is a volunteer. And I would be an example of that. I've agreed to take that on for our church. And I'm looking to pass it off, and I want to make sure it's in the best shape before I pass it on. But giving consideration that whatever you do, it needs to be something that you can maintain. Because, next screen, because uh, if you have an elaborate process that's been well thought out, but you actually don't have the resources to do it, you almost have more liability than if you didn't do anything in the first place. So, whatever you do, think about it being something that you can manage over time, and if people change in their roles. Um, so that I cannot emphasize enough. You know, if something were to happen and legal and insurance becomes involved, the first thing they'll ask for is what is your policy or what are your practices? And if you haven't followed your own practices, that's where you'll have more trouble than if you had actually just said, gosh, we never had one. We were going to, but we don't have one. I mean, that still means that there'll be some sort of ramification, but making a promise about what you're going to do and then you don't do it is really more dangerous than doing baby steps and doing them well. I think
So
over
do
to
I?
you.
Okay, I'm going to do my best here, and I'll just again share that I'm not seeing all of my notes or the group to know the reaction. So we thought it would be really helpful to give some thought and some ideas into situations that happen in our church communities and in our outreach programs within the United Church of Canada. And just having some discussion about where are the risks, who's the vulnerable folks, which is what kind of a program is more vulnerable or less vulnerable, and how you can reduce the risk to anybody that's participating in it. So you can see these. There's probably more we could pick up, but a youth group sleepover at a cottage. And Terri, were we going to let folks just jump in, or we just want to run through them?
I think just getting people to think about them right now,
Okay.
because I think it'll be
All
more
right.
important that we can give people 15 minutes to ask questions.
Sure. So I'm going to just offer some ideas about each of these. So a youth group overnight. So you've got vulnerable teenagers with adult volunteers. That's a dynamic to be considering about who's at risk. There's probably transportation considerations. How do you get to this place? An overnight is often adds more risk than if they go home to sleep in their own place, their own beds, their own comfort levels, other people supervising them then rather than the ones who are involved in this program. So you can imagine you do the assessment on that kind of a program. A volunteer teaching a grade 8 Sunday school class to build a birdhouse. So you can think about, is it a person by themselves? Well, there wouldn't be, because there's probably somebody else there helping to do the birdhouse. So you're not alone with the Sunday school class. The age of the children matters. These are kids that have more agency than little ones for getting help if something goes wrong, but also that they have capacity to do some of this activity. It's not an activity that they're being asked to do that's beyond their ability. So you can see to do that kind of risk assessment. A 75-year-old woman acting as a visiting elder for 4 families. There's lots to consider, and you would be the ones to know. And that 75-year-old woman would be able to say what her capacity is to do this kind of work. How is she getting there? Is she alone? Is she in a house? It looks like the visiting happens likely in a home situation. That adds more risk. Doors are shut. Who knows that she's going, and who knows where she's going? Are
Well,
things
and is the risk actually to the people being visited, or is it actually to the 75-year-old volunteer who may be navigating snowbanks and someone who didn't shovel their driveway?
Yep. So all those sort of things. Even we mentioned 4 families. Is 4 a good number? Is that too many to ask them to do? Could they do more? Or sometimes we hear about visiting elders, or whatever the term may be, that have like 30 families that they're supposed to be visiting. That's a different kind of risk again than saying this is something they can do. Driving a confirmation class to visit a synagogue in your location. A general rule of thumb around driving youth or driving vulnerable people is that you have 2 adults that are in the cart with you, that there wouldn't just be 1 adult in driving them. But there are times, maybe that the extra person said at the last minute they couldn't come. There's a process to be assessing the risk on that. Do we do it anyway? What can we do to reduce the risk? Maybe all the kids phone their parents and tell their parents, I'm in a car with just Kathy. I just want you to know. And this is when we'll be home, or this is the time we're going to be going. So the risk to the participants, but also the risk to the folks that are doing the driving or the supervising. Making squares for a funeral. I wonder if you're thinking, well, what's the risk in that? How can there be something to consider with that? We have lots of public health rules around making food, doing food. We've got, in your kitchens that probably lots of us will have come to the decision that nothing is served in this location unless it's done in a certified kitchen with somebody who has certified training. You may choose that, but if you choose that you're going to not take that complete care that way, why you're doing it the way you're doing it, and reduce as many risks as possible. Terri alluded to the counting offering after church. You really do need a process for this. It really is. It's the reality of it, but also the optics of it. When people one person leaves with a plate of offering and just disappears into a room by themselves to count, that's a risk that people are watching. That's a risk to them. That's a risk to the congregation, to everybody. You need to be setting up, and we can have some conversation at some point too about what makes it a better process. 2 people doing it together, having a rotation of people that do it, not the same person all the time. Maybe not 2 family members doing it and thinking you've got things covered. It's for your own safety, for the church's safety, for those doing the counting, and those who are giving the money.
If I can just jump in here
Sure.
too, there are other activities that money is handled that it's harder to achieve several people counting the money. There may be orders that people are taking funds for something that's been ordered, and so you can create processes that that there's a reconciliation between what was ordered and what was paid for. But there are certainly other places where some consideration to how people are handling money, that's another place of risk.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe losing a few dollars isn't the end of the world, but it's about relationships too. damaging relationships where you feel like you can't trust somebody or there's some suspicion of distrust in a congregation is really something you want to be able to avoid and not, you know, have boiling around or wondering for people. Um, Asking teenagers to teach a junior church or a nursery. I love that Terri's fessed up to things that she hasn't maybe been able to accomplish in this work. I certainly have been in congregations and actually have been the person that has asked a young 13-year-old to take care of a baby or a couple kids in the nursery, and they're desperately wanting to do that kind of work. It's wonderful, and you want to honor that gift that they're going to get, but think about the risks involved and help to reduce them. Are there windows? It's a great opportunity too to be teaching other people about the gifts of duty of care, that it's a great practice. It's our call, it's our duty to say, how do we keep you safe? How do we keep the kids safe? Keep doors open. Don't do it alone, that there's somebody else there to help you. And using words like teach may be a bit of a stretch. You might change that and say, we're asking you to do childcare or babysitting, instead of asking for something that's not maybe going to be happening in the situation. Anything you'd add there, Terri?
Nope. I
Okay.
think probably the next slide is one, just the minimum ways to reduce risk.
Yeah, just a
If there
repeat
was
here.
nothing else you did, if you put aside the screening, put aside applications and paperwork, put aside even developing a handbook, if you are always we're thinking about, do I really want to, what are the risks in any given situation? Do I want to assume it? Do I want to find a way to reduce it? Do I want to change the activity so that there's less risk to it? Do I want to actually make someone else responsible? So we're going to a horse camp, and the horse camp actually requires you to sign the waiver. That's a way of transferring liability. They're the people who know about the horses. I don't know about the horses. And you might choose, sounds like a great idea, but skydiving, we're not going to do it. Sorry, youth group, we will not be doing skydiving. So just if you only used this slide to always approach situations with, is there a risk and is there any way I could manage this better? You will have taken some good steps to keeping people safe, including your leaders. So this is just a quick review slide that starts with, look at your context. Think about those leadership roles. And then identify whatever processes you want to put in place. And part of that is how you would document that work. And then we've listed tools in your toolkit. These are not prescriptive. They are things that could help you formalize the program. And I would certainly be willing, if after this call, folks wanted to reach out to me or to Kathy to just say, hey, can I have a conversation about where my church is at? And, what would you recommend we start with? Because that would certainly, I feel very committed to supporting you to take on what's manageable while you are trying to do what's reasonable. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Can't see the top of my slide. Oh, I've done that again. These are possible. I can't read the top of my slide here, Terri.
If possible, workshops. So just go back
Right,
one. Yeah.
right.
So there could be a workshop on just one element, and we've listed some of the elements. And Kathy, you did say that you could share out our slide deck after this is
Sure.
over. So people will have a chance to go back through and make notes on, what they thought, I need more information, or I'm curious about this. But here would be some examples of things we could spend a bit more time on, if that's helpful to you.
Right. You're reminding me. So yeah, these are, please reach out to me to say I need more in-depth information about that. And if you're asking for it, I bet you there'll be others as well. So I'm going to stop my sharing. Is that okay, Terri? Are we
Yep. Yep.
gone through this? Okay. Oh, Um, there's a bit of time for, I'm going to keep the recording on. If it becomes something that we don't think we need to post, we'll take it off. But there may be some questions or comments people want to make. If you could keep them brief, that'd be good in case there's a number of people that want to say anything.
And it would be nice to see you again.
Yes, feel free to open your mics, or you can raise your hand with the reaction button or just start talking. It's okay.
Yvonne.
Mhm. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Kathy, for that. I think that was very helpful. I think it was Terry who talked about taking the risk or acknowledging the risk in the, for example, the counters. We have rotation, we know who's doing it. And to be aware of family members doing this and all that sort of stuff, which is very helpful. But my question is around positions. So we have the chair of the board is a co-treasurer as well. Is that not conflict? Is that a risk? Or is that something that
it is somewhat of a
matter?
risk. It's the concept comes from accounting, and it would be called segregation of duty. So there's less of a risk if it's treasurer and also the person who writes the tax receipt and issues the checks. But there is a risk because the chairperson can sign a check or payment and authorize an expense that the second person is actually the same person. So there is value in segregating those responsibilities. And there's a great example of your greatest protection isn't in a job description. It isn't in a handbook. It isn't in a screening. It's actually in your role definition, but your process. Do you always require two signatures and they need to be independent positions? It's tough though, Yvonne. I suspect that that person has done it for a while, and the church may be small, and you don't necessarily have a willing volunteer to take on that second task. But just maybe offering some education around they're leaving themselves more vulnerable by having both of those roles, and that there'd be value in working towards it being two independent people. Does that help?
Yes, it does. It does. And there are, I believe, 2 or 3 signatures required.
Good.
And the assistant treasurer had been in the position for a while, but has just recently assumed the chair of the board. And it is
So you're in a transition period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they want to keep being the assistant treasurer as well as being chair of the board. Now I see the potential of risk there, and how do you then, you want to say education, but sometimes it is hard to get this message across that there is conflict and there are risks, and perhaps it should be considered that the chair of the board relinquish the co-treasurer's position
for the period of time that they're the chair. Yes.
Yes.
And certainly helping people understand that can be part of it. It's always tough when people have volunteered. Carrie and Marg, I think you've got a question.
Yes, thanks, Terry, and thanks for your presentation, you and Kathy. Question you brought up early on in the presentation, or Kathy did, faithful footsteps. And I think that precipitated your conversation to Avondale. Where do we find that document? Is it the United Church of Canada website or our regional website to get that document?
Kathy, I think you might know that.
It is at the United Church of Canada website. It is a document that is in the process of being redone, revamped. So it's still on the website of the United Church of Canada, but we are working. There's some great efforts being made to redo that. It still has very valuable information, but it is out of date. in especially with new things, technology and all of that is, we didn't even get into all of that.
No.
The risks of how
Right.
you do faithful or duty of care on screen and things like that. So it's there, Carrie. Reach out to me if you can't find it, and I'll help you with it.
Yeah,
Hi, it's
Mervyn.
Mark. I could be wrong, but I think I put duty of care in the search for the United Church website and nothing came up. So I
Well-
know the website has its issues, but
Yeah.
Well, it might be that it's not ready, that you they've taken it down, but I'll check for you and let you all know.
Yeah,
And
Faithful Footsteps is the name of the document, the original document, and I look forward to seeing a refreshed. But does that look after things, Carrie and Mark?
Yeah, that one does. I just had another question as well. If we didn't have a policy in place, if we didn't, big word, that if word, what would be the one best practice we could start doing immediately to help us with duty of care?
I would say inviting a cross section of your council, or building a small little team that would look at Faithful Footsteps as a starter. And I offer Avondale's Handbook as our little product that we created out of that. If nothing more, you start the process of getting people think about that. That's a great thing. Mervyn, you've had your hand up for a while. I want to make sure you have a chance. And you're on mute.
Yeah, it seems to me the big difficulty in actually implementing this, of course, is dealing with people thinking that you don't trust them. I don't know whether you have any particular wisdom to offer about how you might handle that situation, particularly with people who've been doing a job for some time, and now you're saying to them you want them to go through this kind of assessment process.
You have hit the nail on the head. It's a great example of, these are all wonderful ideas, but you're trying to formalize something that hasn't been formal before. And so it just recognizing that people will perhaps feel insulted or hurt and decide they don't want to do the job anymore. So that's where I would say starting with education is always helpful. You might consider inviting insurance in to talk with the congregation around the risks that happen for churches, and that, the kind of costs that litigation will bring to them in the failure to, thanks for the links that's coming through in terms of Faithful Footsteps. If you go to the chat, you'll see that information available to you. But you're absolutely right that being tender as you start is important. Because you're coming into something that's already been in place. You're not building a brand new organization that you're now looking for new people to populate the leadership roles. You're actually imposing something new that they've never had to do before. What I would say is, the younger the individual, the more familiar they are that they can't do anything in the world without some sort of screening process. They understand it. I remember when we first tackled it back in 2012, and I worked with a member who came from childcare. So she wanted this really rigorous program. And I said, oh my goodness, like, we'll lose the Sunday school. No one, who's going to maintain this paperwork? That is a nightmare. We need to kind of find some sort of balance here. But even in the course of looking at volunteer drivers, because we used to have a little program that we would pick people up for church, that moved it, and people said, something, no, I'm not going to drive anymore. So we actually made the decision, if people choose to do driving, they're setting, they're neighbors, they're friends for life, they're being kind. We're not taking responsibility that we now offer the driving program, but we encourage, if you know somebody who wants to get to church, ask if you can help, and they'll decide whether they're comfortable you driving. So there would be an example where we did lose a few volunteers who are our drivers, because they felt that now they were suddenly going to have a screen. And at 75, it didn't make sense to them. I've never had a record, and how dare you? I've gone to this church for, all my life. I was baptized here, and now you're suggesting I need a criminal reference check. So being tender as you decide what you institute can be helpful.
Yeah, we're thinking of introducing a luncheon program for isolated seniors, so that this issue of transportation undoubtedly arises. Would a volunteer driver need to inform their insurers that they were doing this?
I don't know. I would say possibly. If it's a formal role under your program, then you're taking on the risk as well as they're taking on the risk. You might find a consultation with like Meals on Wheels or one of the seniors programs can help you decide how you might want to choose to handle that. The sad part about it is that oftentimes nothing happens. But the reason you have a program or an approach is because you never know when something could happen. So just being thoughtful and even a conscious decision, something we know there are risks, but we're going to start small. They're only driving in town. The driver is known to them. We'll start with, their neighbor. Like there may be simple ways you can get started. I would hate for a great idea to not be able to happen because you're afraid that you could put people at risk. But that one slide about how can I manage the risk is really probably the one to pay attention to. And there could be more time to chat about that another time. Bev.
Just a sec. I'm just going to add two things to that. And then, yeah, Bev would be a great one to end with. One is that when you're saying what the activity is, you could say, what is our goal of this activity? What are we trying to do? And if there's if it's to get people to come to church on Sunday, you could say, well, having a driving program doesn't work, but we'll pay for their taxi. Like, think of outside of the box a little bit too, and have a group of people to help you with that thinking. And the other is, Mervyn, you can use this webinar as an excuse to say, I went to a webinar and the region is suggesting, and the national church is suggesting, it's not just me, like divert the liability or the reasons to do something because you've learned something that would be helpful for everybody. Yeah, I'm going to let Bev offer something here.
I'm not going to turn my video on because it's playing funny this morning, but one of the things I wanted to mention in conjunction with driving programs is anybody who's going to be a driver, you want to screen them as well. And what you're looking for is a clean driving abstract. That's critical because if they've had, in the past, numerous accidents, if they've had DUIs or anything like that, it puts your risk of liability and it just increases the risk that you're taking. It's not a big deal to get done. You can, in fact, I don't even think it costs anything to have a driver's abstract done. And you just do it through, in Ontario, I think you get it through the Service Ontario. So
that would be an example that the kind of screening is directly related to the work that they're going to do. And so that's a really great suggestion, Bev. The other thing is that insurance would say you should be looking at 2 million liability. So I think that actually answers the question that Carrie and Marg had, or perhaps Mervyn had, but just the notion that should the volunteer notify their insurance company? Probably, because it should relate to the issue of their coverage. Yes, Bev?
The other thing that's related to the insurance is if an accident occurs, the claim is going to be against the individual's insurance first before it would come against the church, in my understanding. So that's something that the individuals who are participating need to be aware of, is that any claim will go against their personal insurance, even if the church has like coverage for others, it'll still hit the individual first.
So I'll help us wrap up because I know that we are to the time. That's true, but if in fact the church organized the volunteers, then the church also becomes liable. And you've got to keep in mind that if there's going to be a lawsuit, they'll look to name everybody. So there's no getting around that one. All you can do is do what you can to protect people. And as much as this has been heavily laden around protecting the participants, truthfully, back to Mervyn and your question of how do you do the sales pitch about why to do this, you know, you are working to protect your volunteers and your staff, that their practices are as safe as possible. And so, because people can allege that something happened and it never happened. And what's their protection if they were by themselves? So that's where you want to be thinking about a program that's protecting everybody, the church, the staff, the volunteers, the participants. Because in the end, if something happens, legal will look to find everybody responsible.
I'm going to officially end this, and I want to say you have already, by being here today, offered some duty of care to yourself and to all those that you may be in relationship with, whether in your community of faith or other programs. So thank you so much for caring this much to be here this morning. And reach out for any more information or conversation that you need. I'm just going to end with a scripture again, because this is all grounded in our tradition. This is the reason we do what we do. In Matthew 25, it says, "Whosoever you do to the least of these, you do unto me." We do this work for the holy, for the community, and for ourselves and each other. So thank you again for being here. And thank you so much, Terri, for your skill at sharing information and your knowledge.
Happy to do it. So there will be handouts come out. And if that prompts you to reach back to Kathy, that's just great.